Hey, what's happening, YouTube? So for today's video, what I'm going to be doing is actually ranking the albums that Blood Incantation picked when they were at the Amoeba record store in California. I've had the privilege of going to both the Los Angeles and the San Francisco location of Amoeba, and it's a great time. It's definitely like Mecca if you are a record collector. So with this, they picked albums all over the map. They actually did 21 different albums, and it was quite a homework assignment. I'm not gonna lie. And some of the stuff went a little over my head, and it was definitely uncharted waters for me. But it was a really cool experience. So I'm really just gonna have some fun with this ranking. I'm sure you're not gonna agree with all my opinions, but feel free to leave some in the comments, and let's have a good time. All right, guys, let's get into it. So I'm gonna go in the order of the releases that were selected by Blood Incantation. So we are going to start with Fate's Warning and Perfect Symmetry. So I think this is a really awesome album. It has somewhat of a mechanical feel in terms of the rhythms, but there's a lot of interesting songwriting choices. You know, it's not always just linear verse, chorus, etc. Definitely going in a progressive direction. Ray Alder's voice takes a little bit of getting used to over the course of the whole album. Maybe it's a bit much, but he really sings well, and when it hits, it hits. Excellent performances all around. I'm going to give this thing an A, and I got to pick up a copy. Excellent album. All right, so for the next one, we have a familiar favorite of many metal fans. So we have Morbid Angel with Formula's Fatal to the Flesh. So this is kind of mid-period Morbid Angel. We have Steve Tucker on vocals, Trey on guitar still, of course, and then Pete Sandoval on drums, absolutely killing it. There's a lot of variety in terms of tempos and feel on this album. Has a little bit more of a psychedelic experimental feel for Morbid Angel. They've kind of proven themselves with Covenant and Altars and Domination. They're really just going further in terms of expanding out of their comfort zone. This is a Morbid Angel album I grab for all the time. So I'm going to give this one an A as well. And don't worry, things are going to start, going downhill a little bit. Speaking of, so we have Wallenstein with the album Mother Universe. So Wallenstein is a German prog band from like the 70s, and it's really well recorded. There's nice aspects to it. It has like an organic type feel. I think for me, it's just the vocals kind of kill it a little bit. It sounds kind of like an attempt to sound like David Bowie, except German, and it really doesn't do too well for me. The nice thing is the album doesn't have a ton of vocals on it, so I think they're aware of maybe their limitations. I think this thing's really interesting and unique, and if you're into prog, check it out, but I wouldn't call it like a hidden gem classic by any means. I'm going to give this one C tier. So for the next one, we have a classic jazz record. This is the Dave Brubeck Quartet with Time Out. I'm sure a lot of people just have, maybe through even like commercials or movies, heard the song Take Five. But this is a really accessible, pleasant jazz album. You don't go to this to get your like mind blown. You get it for tasteful playing, especially on the saxophone. So I think this thing's a classic for a reason. You can put it on during a dinner party and no one's going to be offended. I'm going to give this thing an S. All right, the next one, I had not heard of this artist or album before. This is Osamu Katajima, and the album is called Behind the Light. I think where this one does well is it has like analog and digital sounds, and they work really well in harmony. Definitely has like a Japanese feel. There's Japanese instrumentation. I think like if I'm going to be critical, though, it can be a little bit of a snooze fest. It sounds maybe a little bit dated. And it sounds like the kind of album that we'd be playing in like a store that sells incense and gems. So I'm going to personally give this a C. But if you want some good background music, nothing wrong there. This next one was a pleasant surprise since I'm familiar with both artists. We have Carlos Santana, of course, from Santana, and then John McLaughlin of Mahavishnu Orchestra. And they both combine their efforts as guitar heroes and create a really awesome album. It's hard to know exactly when one player is playing and when the other is because they kind of work really well. Maybe I'm just not as educated there, but they really do a good job of creating almost like spiritual album that does not feel pretentious. They have a lot of motifs that they're going from John Coltrane's Love Supreme, which is really cool. It's like their own interpretation for it. This album's awesome. If you're into jazz fusion and really like forward pushing jazz and like kind of rock music that obviously comes from that era, check this thing out. It's great. I'm going to give this an A as well. All right, so here's another kind of ambient and electronic album that I wasn't familiar with. This is Bernard Exultol with Music by Exultol. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. So from what I've gathered, he is a artist that's American from like the 70s, and a lot of this music was made through like tape loops. What's really cool about this one is that there's a lot of interweaving different textures and like melodies. It kind of reminds me of like gamelan music or like King Crimson Discipline in terms of how the guitars play with one another. Steve Reich, Philip Glass, this type of like melodic percussive like chugging along feel. You have that with the synthesizers here. Personally, I'm going to give this a B, but I did find it really interesting and engaging. I just think some of the other albums that are in that same genre on this are just a bit stronger. And speaking of that, we have Steve Hillage, formerly of Gong, with his album Rainbow Dome Music. So I think where this one's stronger is that there's a little bit more variety and changes and very smooth and subtle changes. And it just, creates a more engaging listen. In terms of like his experience in Gong, I'm sure that helps shape like how this album has a little bit more substance to it. But in terms of, ambient albums, you really can't go wrong here. So I would check this one out. I'm going to personally give this a, let's do B+. So going back into metal territory, we have Abigor's album Les Motifs Lucifer. Abigor is really cool. It's very avant-garde black metal, disorienting, dissonant, dark, but I think never really goes like too far. So, I think this is a really great pick. I listened to it a couple of times. Not all of it's really sticking with me. I think it's all about the experience while you're listening to it. There's nothing you can hum afterwards, but I don't think that's the point. So I'm going to personally give this a B+. I got to pick this up sometime. Abigor is definitely an underrated artist that doesn't get brought up a lot. All right. And now we have one of my favorite albums of all time. We have The Seeds of Love by Tears for Fears. So Tears for Fears really doesn't miss, especially in the early period. So, you start out with Pale Shelter, you got Songs from the Big Chair, and you got Seeds of Love. And this album is definitely the most psychedelic, bombastic, excellent playing. It's got, obviously the hit Seeds of Love, but it also has a lot of like deep cuts that have so many details and textures, really awesome drumming and guitar playing. Like you can listen to this album and every single time you'll pick up on something new. Artists that can blend that pop sensibility with a progressive and accessible type sound, like the ones that do it the best, like Talk and, Tears for Fears, like that is my shit. So I'm giving this thing an S, and I'm, really going to be putting it top of the S's here. So next one, this is another ambient type album, and I was really pleasantly surprised by it. So it's Pauline Anna Strom, Angel Tears and Sunlight. So apparently she is a blind artist who's been around since the 70s, and this album was really just released not that long ago. And I've never really heard anything quite like it. So there's this one track on it. I'm blanking on the name, but it's like every single note is a different instrument. And then it comes up with this long repeating sequenced like phrase. So you have all these different instruments just bouncing back. And it's kind of jarring in a cool, like calming way too. So I like the variety on this album. I like that it has its own unique style. I think really this whole exercise of listening to all these different ambient albums is I'm realizing how much diversity there really is in that genre, and I got to dig in deeper because I'm definitely a noob there right now. But I'm going to give this thing a B plus, and definitely check it out. All right, so this one is Tomorrow's Just Another Day by Yukihiro Takahashi. From the video, they labeled it as like the Japanese craft work, or has like some new order type feeling to it, and I can definitely see that. It reminded me a little bit of like Brian Eno in the sense of it sounds like a producer making an album, and I always like that. I like it when somebody's just using the recording studio as basically an instrument at their disposal. I thought this was really cool. Wasn't crazy about the vocals. Sometimes the melodies just didn't really hit home for me, but I thought it was really interesting, innovative. It'd be a good reference point for trying to come up with ideas. I'm going to give this thing a C plus. All right. So the next one is English Settlement by XTC. So XTC, Britpop band. They kind of have a little bit of a Beatles sound, but more like in the 80s. I'm kind of a Fairweather fan with XTC. There's something about the vocals and maybe like the time period that it was created that doesn't resonate a ton with me. I definitely love Skylarking. And this album has a lot of really interesting percussive production choices, but some of the lyrics and the melodies, they just don't really hit home for me. And it's a long album, and by the end of it, I kind of get sick of the vocalist. So I'm going to personally give it a C plus, but it has some real good highlights. And if you like XTC, you would like it. Just I have to be really in the right mindset, and I'd actually rather listen to the album in like two halves. So this next one is a soundtrack to the show Cowboy Bebop and is by Seatbelts. So a lot of it has kind of like a big band, bombastic jazz sound, but there is some like more mellow parts within the soundtrack. And I was really happy when we got to those parts of the album because I'm not a huge big band type person. Sometimes it can just kind of come off a little bit cheesy. That being said, this is really good. I don't have any relation to the show, so it maybe isn't hitting me quite there, but it's catchy when it needs to be. It's over the top. I thought it was really good. I'm going to give this a B. So for me, this is the first real stinker out of the whole group because all these albums I would recommend. And if you like new age music, feel free to. But for me, there's just not much substance. This next one, which is Sitting Still Within Sitting Still Without. I had to look at my notes to make sure I got that right. But it's by Karma Moffat. So I think it's just really not my thing. It's a bit too new agey. There's a lot of the singing bowls and chimes, and I just kind of sitting there just wondering when it's actually going to kick in. And I'm a pretty patient listener, but it's just not really meant for me. Maybe at the time it was innovative, but right now I'm going to have to pass. I'm going to give that a D. So the next one is In the Garden by Eurythmics. So this is their debut album, and it's very different than the Eurythmics you might know, with Sweet Dreams. I did think it was very interesting. I still think it is a band trying to figure out their sound. And there are parts that really hit home for me. There's one track in particular that had like kind of a hectic type feel, like it was very upbeat and fast and really kind of urgent. And I thought that was really interesting, kind of like post-rock, post-pop. Personally, I'm going to give this a B, and I could see my opinion on this one changing, definitely. All right, so the next one is Gong with Angel's Egg. And this is my second favorite Gong album. And it's funny how many Gong references really are within this whole list, I'm noticing. But, this band, I think they were just doing a bunch of acid. They were, in like a commune away from the city. And it sounds like that, but in a cool way. I'm going to give this thing an S, and I strongly recommend anybody who likes psychedelic rock, especially once you've gotten through some of the more typical picks. Once you like Gentle Giant, your next layer deeper is like Gong. So Gong, some albums are better than others. Definitely starting here is a good choice. All right, so we got another type of ambient album, except this one's a little bit more cinematic. We have Michael Stearns with Planetary Unfolding. I really like the album cover. I think it fits the sound really well. But it just creates a really heavy atmosphere and magnitude when you're listening to it. And then it drops off and it becomes a lot more soft and subtle. And the way it builds and climbs reminds me a little bit of like classical music, but through like an ambient lens. So this one I definitely recommend in terms of the ambient records. I'm going to give this one an A. All right, we got another ambient album, and this is the posthumous release by Klaus Schultz, and this is Deus Arrakis. I believe had inspiration and influence from the Dune series. So what's great about this one is it's very serene and cinematic, and it has like an uplifting quality too. There's excellent flow between the tracks, and it has enough like movement and variety to keep you interested. I definitely have to pick this album up as well as other Klaus Schultz albums because, like I said, I'm pretty new to the ambient genre, but I think this one does have a step above all the other ambient albums here. I'm going to give this one an S. And you got the Lee seal of approval of the best ambient album they picked on that particular day in Amoeba. All right, getting down to the bottom two here. We have Eloy with Metromania. So this is an 80s release by a German prog band that's mostly known for like their late 70s output. This is a funny album. The production is so mid 80s, it's not even funny, and definitely has a very strong German accent on vocals. I'd say this one has a lot of charm to it, but is it like top-notch Eloy? I would say no, but it's a very interesting album. It's fun. It, just kind of captures that 80s sound. And I love the album cover, and it's just something that you want to collect, frankly. So I would definitely put this on again and again. And I think sometimes I just like those albums that maybe aren't like perfect, but they have enough interesting elements that I kind of like that charm of them. So I'm going to give this one personally a B. But that being said, I actually could see listening to it even more frankly than some of these A's and B's, or B pluses rather. All right, so we got the last pick here. We have Epicus Dumicus Metallicus by Candlemass. So this is the classic Candlemass album before Messiah joined on vocals. Of course, we have Solitude as one of the tracks here, which is an obvious staple of their catalog. And it's a doom metal classic for a reason. I don't reach for Candlemass all the time, or really any doom metal for that matter, but they do it better than anybody else. Except maybe a few other artists. So I remember, being like 16 and hearing Solitude for the first time, and I had it right next to One Road to Asa Bay by Bathory, and it was just like a perfect pairing and kind of appealed to my moody teenage sensibilities. Yeah, this is a classic. I'm going to give this one an A, actually, in this case. I could easily see why people would say S. Just for me, I don't listen to it enough probably to give it an S, and wanted to kind of break it up from some of these other ones that I think are really classics for a reason. Anyways, I'm sure people are going to be upset with some of my picks here. And like I said, I'm not an expert at a lot of these albums. I listened to them once, twice, and just wanted to make some quick opinions on them. Check out the original Blood Incantation video. I found it very informative, and I wouldn't have found all these artists without them. So hope you guys had some fun watching this, and feel free to correct all my mistakes in the comments. Thanks.